Hi there, my name's Lockie. I'm a Microsoft technical trainer, and it's great to have you with us. In this video, we're going to be looking at endpoint data loss prevention. Now, there's a few different aspects of this that I want to cover as part of this broad kind of topic. And the main thing that we're looking at is not only the actual implementation of it, creating policies, working within the structure, but also the alerts that get generated. They're pretty unique, and endpoints provide us an interesting avenue for protection and for the aspects of control within our business. I'm also going to cover how Edge for Business differs from other browsers because there is some interesting additional restrictions, blocks, and also checking that we can put in place via data loss prevention policies specifically around the use of Edge for Business there. Let's get ourselves started. Now, following the Information Protection Framework, this is part of the Prevent Data Loss stage. Feel free to pause the video at this moment to take a look at some of the details. For more information, head on over to learn.microsoft.com. All right, let's get started with how we're actually going to roll out endpoint data loss prevention. We'll begin with just talking about how it actually works, i.e. what it is and why endpoint data loss prevention policies are a little bit different compared to other areas that we can apply DLP. We'll look through how endpoint DLP works, a little bit of how we onboard devices, and I'll make sure to show off a couple of things in a demonstration as well. Let's jump in and talk about endpoint DLP as a broad category. What is it and how do we actually set things up? Endpoint DLP is focused on adding restrictions to Windows and Mac OS-based devices, at least Microsoft Purview Endpoint DLP is, and providing ways of preventing certain types of physical activities on the device. So not only is this looking at cloud-based actions, things around OneDrive and SharePoint, etc., we can now apply rules that restrict activities like copying to USB or uploading to certain websites, or even the printing of sensitive documents. Endpoint DLP gives us a layer of control that otherwise is just not achievable. Now, because of the way that it's set up, it gives us an avenue for data exfiltration protection that is just not otherwise feasible. We can go through and block or log unauthorized access and ensure that we know when people are using external storage devices or when they try and send things out to network drives. We can even go through and have consistent enforcement policies. We now have another mechanism to do it, to essentially mean that a file that is stored in the cloud can have the same level of control once it's downloaded locally to a device, and we can still apply individual collection policies around how that should be distributed. More or less, it's a way of us extending beyond just the cloud into physical devices that are in front of a user. Now, it doesn't have to be just a block. In fact, one of the most useful facets of the endpoint DLP setup within Purview is its ability to tooltip. Tooltips allow us to notify users when something is going wrong. If a label is put in the wrong spot or someone does a risky action, not necessarily a violation directly, we can actually notify them on the device itself. Even down to the opening of certain browsers or applications, we can have direct notifications and let the user know in real time that something has gone, maybe not in the direction that it should. So we've clearly got a lot of power with endpoint DLP. Let's think about how we might actually roll out a DLP policy. Clearly, there's going to be some extra steps because we're working with physical devices. To get ourselves started, we need to have the devices onboarded into endpoint DLP. Now, this can be done in a number of different ways: SCCM, Defender for Endpoint, Intune, but as long as you have a modern device running, say, Windows 11, you're effectively good to go. Group policy, all of those standard structures still apply here, so there are always a way to get your devices onboarded. Next, though, we need to ensure that we actually have network connectivity. There's going to be certain exclusions or restrictions you'll need to put in place to make sure that we can actually reach the endpoint directly. And this is something that we can set up. There's further details available over in the learn.microsoft.com documentation focused around specific endpoints and locations you'll need to have that put out to. Next, we'll need to decide settings. There is a broad set of settings, and I'm going to configure a couple of important ones as part of our initial setup in the demonstration to show you what it looks like when we actually go through and put in, say, restrictions on unapproved browsers or restrictions on certain USB devices. There's a really big level of control that you have around how devices themselves are actually going to function when we put it in place. Next, we need to define policies. Effectively, what do we want to do? What are the conditions you're putting in place? What activities are we monitoring? Is it a block? Is it an audit? Is it a log? Is it a warning? You need to think about how you actually want to notify or restrict a user accordingly. Finally, simulate your policies and then deploy them out. Simulation first to make sure we haven't missed anything, and deployment to make sure that everything is ready to go. We suggest using a pilot group first to get yourself started, and once you have your initial pilot group ready, they've given you the feedback and we've tested it out, you can roll it out more broadly to users. Consider a ring-based approach with a small group of users testing things initially and then building out from there. Last of all, it's not done. This is going to be a continuous improvement process. Monitor alerts, monitor positives and false positives to see what the rates are looking like and adjust over time as you need to. Now, a couple of individual pieces on each of these as we go through. Starting with just the onboarding, please make sure that you do have that ability to see it. And as I mentioned, there is many different ways we can achieve the onboarding of this. Note the ability to have a VDI session for a non-persistent desktop as well. DLP doesn't necessarily have to be just for physical devices. Works great for virtualized devices and virtualized desktops too. Once we actually do have our onboarding complete, then you need to go through and configure the endpoint itself. There are going to be certain things that you will wish to exclude. I'll show you how to do a file exclusion in a tick, but think locations that you don't typically want scanned with antivirus. This would be the sort of stuff that we'll want to go through, and so DLP focuses on only the most critical data and is not wasting time with potential false negatives that are in an unclassified state. We also do have the ability to add just-in-time restrictions at this point. Now, JIT restrictions are quite interesting within an endpoint context because this essentially adds almost an artificial delay to a user action. When a user attempts to do a sensitive action, like pasting information into a generative AI tool, we will essentially halt things for a moment. We'll wait until the scan comes back to confirm whether it has been classified as sensitive or not, and then we allow the user to proceed once that's complete. This is an optional setting that you can put in place, but it's a really important one to consider because it drastically reduces things like false negatives by ensuring that we're not filtering through unclassified content that then was immediately classified. This is a user experience conversation, and you need to decide where it's appropriate to have this sort of JIT protection and where it works best for you. Now we have our policies themselves. Once we create a policy, you need to decide, okay, we're enforcing on devices. What next? Is it the tooltip? Is it the warning? Is it the block? Regardless of the direction that you use, you need to make sure that you are setting things up correctly and deciding early on things like sensitive information types that are going to be relevant. What are you actually scanning for at this moment? As much as we can effectively duplicate rules that we see in other types of data loss prevention, there may be certain types of things you're looking for on an end device that don't really match what we would look for within a SharePoint or a OneDrive location. Consider some of the different things that you are looking to match for and the way that you're setting it up in that environment there. Now, for some scenarios, you may not be able to do a full onboarding of a device. That's okay. There are some mechanisms to extend endpoint DLP to certain external browsers. We'll look at Edge for Business in a moment, but if you are utilizing Chrome or Firefox, there is actually a browser extension available. This will allow you to do real-time enforcement and activity tracking of different types of sensitive information within the context of that browser at the very least. This one's quite useful because it still means that we can effectively enforce things like JIT controls, the ability to stop data from being copied to and from a clipboard, or downloading certain files if they meet certain requirements around sensitivity, even if we are not necessarily in an environment where Edge for Business is what's being utilized. Even if you're in an environment where you support multiple browsers, This gives you a mechanism to have at least some sort of centralized deployment that we can apply to multiple locations where devices themselves can't be onboarded directly. Consider this as an extension option if you are looking to roll things out. Intune or group policy supported to be able to set this one up, and you just need to make sure you have the correct permissions put in place. One place that you may want to consider this is bring your own devices. If a user is setting up their own device to be able to use work as sort of a half and half, you can potentially use this as a way to use multiple browsers, ensure they're protected, and users still work in a compliant manner. Again, if you're using Edge for Business, this sort of setup is not required. We'll look at that one in a little bit. A bit more detail on JIT as sort of a last point here as well. Because of that delay in the action, make sure you consider where it should be put in place. This will be a true pause. If someone hits print, the action is paused until the classification is done. If someone tries to copy to a USB device, the action is actively paused until the action can be completed. However, there is a number of fallback options which can assist the user experience in a scenario where the scan doesn't complete in an expected time. The fallback options are effectively audit, so notify that we weren't able to complete a scan within the expected time period, or a block. Blocks can be quite impactful, and you need to educate users that this could potentially happen in their environment if you choose to utilize them. Make sure that you are going through that if DLP cannot confirm that, it will block it, and notifying people what the expected behavior is, how that will function, and how it will look. As a last point, make sure you do fine-tune. There is a lot of things that we need to think about with this, and especially when you're configuring JIT, we want it to be a narrow scope that's focused on only your most sensitive information. If you're rolling it out more broadly, you may want to think about how you're actually going to fine-tune this to minimize user delays as much as possible. Make sure you're considering where and why you need this action to be taken, and if it's only certain users or device types that need to be ordered in this way. All right, we've given it just a quick overview. A lot of this is much easier once you see the creation process itself. So let's go through and actually create a policy. We're going to make one that focuses on the blocking of USB transfer data. It's a great example and one that's pretty common in businesses. And then I'll add a couple of restrictions, browser restrictions, stuff like that, so I can show you where all of those settings go through and how we get ourselves running. And we're over in the Microsoft Purview portal, and we're going to create an endpoint DLP policy. DLP is interesting because of that way that it extends data direction directly to Windows, Mac OS devices, integrating with Defender for Endpoint and things like that. To get ourselves started, we're going to head across to the Solutions tab and open our Data Loss Prevention solution. This is where we're going to be able to do all of our DLP policies, endpoint or otherwise. Now, endpoint DLP does use that same foundational engine as a standard DLP pattern matching setup, so you can effectively use the same strategies, but obviously to a different outcome. We're interested in actually protecting enterprise applications and devices directly. Effectively, that device option is the thing that we are really most interested in here. We'll go through now and we'll hit Create Policy, and I want to create a custom policy at this point. Since we are interested in doing something in particular, in our case, preventing USB transfer of data, we want to make sure that we've got a nice, clear description. We'll select our enterprise applications and devices. That is of the two options there. The other one's focused on Edge for Business. And then we will go through and select Custom as the type of policy we wish to use. There are a number of categories pre-existing and a few that do apply to the endpoint DLP, but Custom is what we are most interested in. Once we select Next, we'll give it a quick name and so we understand what this looks like next time we come to it. We'll give it a nice clear block USB transfers, and then we'll also give a description about what this is entailing. Note the use of sensitive data. I'm only interested in certain data classifications being captured as part of this. Now, the way that we are going to do this is essentially by creating a simple filter first based on location, where location is device. There's many different options we have within DLP policies, but by deselecting all bar the device, we can target all devices, device groups, and users who are utilizing enrolled devices. From here, we can go through and start to customize the policies itself. we're going to need to come up with some sort of match that allows us to work with this. So effectively, you need to decide what it is you actually want to work with. What is it you are filtering and capturing, and how do we want to be able to go through and find those things? So we'll hit create rule here, and we're going to make something that is focused on a number of different sensitive info types. Now, because there is a range of different sits that we theoretically could use, especially when it comes to sensitive data, let's try and focus on just one scenario. We're going to look for something that is focused on financial or employee data, so that specific subset. To do this, we're going to hit content contains, and then we're going to start selecting the sensitive information types that are relevant to the scenario we're trying to solve. I'll be back in 2 ticks once we've selected those sits. And we're back. We now have 4 different sensitive info types selected, focused on employee IDs and a number of different financial scenarios. With these 4 put in place, we can go through and we can start to customize how we want to respond when we find these pieces of information. Now, the critical thing we want to do is take an action, and note the actions in this list. Some of them are going to be specific to devices because we've selected that, and I want to go through and restrict certain activities on the device. There is a range of different things that we can restrict, and for the most part, I'm actually going to leave these as default because this also allows a secondary boon of being able to audit when certain actions actually occur. So if someone copies to a clipboard, we can go into an audit-only mode. But if someone takes the same data and attempts to copy it to a USB device, we simply wish to block. Note, block, not block with override. So there is no mechanism for a user to bypass this with the policy in place. Other pieces in terms of network shares, printer, these sorts of things, even down to Bluetooth applications, can be configured as part of the policy setup when applied to a device directly. Now that we've gone through and we've built this out, we essentially have a policy that's ready to go around intentional or unintentional exfiltration of data on USB devices. With a couple of little customizations to make sure the user knows why they are being blocked and under what conditions, and note we can customize that notification as well if we need, and the ability to give policy tips if we are over in Microsoft 365, we now have pretty much all of the pieces in play. Once we hit save on the rule here, we'll be able to apply this as part of the broader policy we're looking to implement. Note there is still other pieces around incident reporting that you can put in place, but most of these are optional if you need to configure them down the line. We'll hit save, and we'll go through and finish off the creation of the policy itself, including how we want to activate this policy initially. As always, we recommend running the policy in simulation mode to test things out to make sure it's not going to impact users in an untoward manner. You can choose to have the policy turn on if it's not edited within, say, 15 days using the flick switch there. At this point, we hit submit and we are ready to go. Note there is a tooltip for us actually stating that we could also enable this in Teams as an additional way to protect certain types of sensitive information. These location tooltips are useful if you're looking to extend a policy out or trying to work out how to make them more versatile and flexible. And we are now done. A policy is created and it will be rolled out across the organization. Now, devices that are covered under our endpoint DLP, they will now be able to have this protection applied, and we can prevent certain types of data from being exfiltrated via a USB device. Now, there is actually a couple of additional things that I want to alter, but these aren't done in the DLP portal. We're actually going to need to head over to the Settings tab of Purview. So let's head on over there now. All right, first of all, we're going to scroll on through down to data loss prevention within the solution settings. Solution settings are useful where we want to change things that are not policy specific, but are instead broad changes to the functionality across our environment. Now, there's some examples within here that will become pretty obvious as to why you might want to put them in place. We talked about file path exclusions as part of the ramp up to this, and this is common if you have a certain location that you don't want scanned. Think temporary file locations or something on a local machine that if we scan it all the time, it's just going to be a burden on the machine or increase the number of false positives. If you need to exclude something like this, you can put this in one central location to exclude that file path. This is available for both Windows and Macintosh devices. Beyond this, we also have the ability to restrict certain applications. Now, browser restrictions is actually an interesting one. If you're primarily focusing on Edge for business, or there's certain browsers you actually wish to allow but others that you would prefer to actively deny, we can use the endpoint DLP client to say, hey, if you are not on one of the sanctioned devices, or more specifically, if you are on an unsanctioned application, say in our case, Google Chrome and maybe Opera, we can go through and make sure that those are captured. If you don't see the browser you're looking to filter in this list, you can add it manually, so always keep that in mind. Now we're effectively saying that sensitive files should not be handled in these applications. Doesn't mean users can't use them outright, but we're focused on sensitive file control at this point. Even down to domains. Is there a particular domain that you wish to block the ability for sensitive files to be uploaded to? Think about external storage services as an example of something where we might want to place a restriction to ensure that certain things are not uploaded if they shouldn't be. We can jump in and we can add something like storage.net, a storage service that's in our example scenario here. If you need to go through and ensure that there is a block being applied to that environment, this is one way to achieve it. Blocking unsupported browsers, certain cloud domains, unmanaged platforms, these are great ways to be able to apply large controls to a whole environment if you need to. Now, remember, you do not necessarily have to have your devices onboarded into Defender directly to be able to make a lot of these changes, because we do have the ability to work within the Purview extension for browsers and the ability to work with Defender for Edge. As long as we are signed into that work profile, there's always an option to get integration and make things work for you. Now, I mentioned that Edge for Business has many of these protections inbuilt. We don't need an additional extension to get ourselves up and running. So let's talk about what you actually get from Edge for Business out of the box, because there's a couple of additional features. We'll talk about what the browser protections actually look like, how it actually applies them directly, and we'll give a couple of examples around the blocking of sensitive data with something that's definitely a hot topic, the ability to work with unmanaged AI applications using DLP controls. Let's get ourselves started. Now, when we work with Edge for Business, because we have designed it from the ground up to work within a business scenario, DLP policies are built in as integrated. If you have Purview in place, you can actually go through and download the DLP policies and apply them without any additional extensions or really anything else along the way. You need to have an Intune managed device that is put in place, and if it's an unmanaged device, at the very least, you need to have your users signed in with a work profile. Now, that is a very low bar to pass. Effectively, if you support users signing into Edge on any profile, you now have a mechanism to control what data is moved in and out and how it is downloaded and uploaded within the context of the browser there. This is designed specifically to protect intra-connected business apps. So think things that you would sign in with your work applications, but it also is able to target general cloud applications and has been specifically built around generative AI tool protection. So if someone is using a public-based generative AI tool, such as ChatGPT, it gives us a way to apply DLP restrictions without having to have broader restrictions placed on the device itself. Aside from that, standard DLP policies around uploading, downloading, copying, pasting, all of that is still put in place for any applications that are supported within the context of the device there that the browser can see. Now, I want to talk a little bit more on the unmanaged AI application component here, because this is an interesting and really good feature set within Edge for Business. Effectively, we have the ability to create inline web traffic policies. So as much as we are focusing on public AI services such as ChatGPT, This also covers things like the public version of Microsoft Copilot to ensure that only data that is marked at the correct level of sensitivity can be used in these public services. If you want to apply policies to restrict or remove access to certain applications, there is a cloud app focused in the unmanaged cloud apps application space, specifically focused on blocking text and file uploads and even restricting certain browser activities within the device. Now, Edge has a mechanism to do this sort of enforcement, and it will use Intune configuration policies to be able to apply that if you're using Intune there. This is an extremely good game changer for me because it really lowers the bar to having businesses being able to protect their sensitive data when we actually go through and move into the unsanctioned app space. But having said that, if you want to instead focus on sanctioned apps, this gives you a mechanism to control sensitivity with sanctioned applications in the cloud, even on a personal or unmanaged device. So, with the ability to hook into third-party systems such as Workday, conditional access policies can now scan for, do we have in-browser protection? We have that mechanism to be able to go through on supported devices using a work profile and effectively check the traffic as it flows. Because of that ability to create these inline web traffic policies directly in browser, we're starting to get most of the control that we would get with a Defender for Endpoint style setup, at least from the purview perspective. But we can extend that out to locations that otherwise we simply would not be able to control. If you're trying to think about places that you might want to put this in place, external contractors are certainly one, temporary employees, guests into an environment, these are all great examples of where we might put it in play. Make sure that when you are putting this in place, your security team are able to see the events and alerts. Realistically, they are the ones that are going to be most interested in the alerts that raise, just like we see with other alerts that can be used in Defender XDR. Speaking of which, the actual reporting does go through into all of the standard places within Purview. So if you're less interested in the alerts directly and more focused on just some of the activity-based components, Activity Explorer, audit logs, and the XDR output are still available in the same way. You can provide the filters on any of these as you need to be able to work through, find the right user interaction traces, and make sure that you know where managed and unmanaged applications are being utilized in your environment. Now that we've got our policies in place related to endpoints and DLP, let's actually see what we're able to get out of it, some of these alerts directly. The alerts themselves are extraordinarily useful, and whether it be Edge for Business or Endpoint itself, there's clearly use cases beyond just what we achieve here. I want to talk through how we can manage some of the alerts that come through. We'll talk about some of the aggregation startups that we have as well. You don't have to have a single alert come from a single event. You can aggregate things together. And we'll make sure that you understand some of the different ways in which matched content actually functions within Purview. Let's jump in. Now, DLP alerting and monitoring effectively gets split down the line. On the left-hand side, we have Defender XDR. For those in the security space, alerts are available there for them to view and manage. And on the right-hand side, we have Purview. This is tracking of policies and making sure that your false positive rate is low and all of the things that come with it. Now, these two different areas are focused on essentially different types of correlation more than anything. Whereas XDR is focused on looking at deeper investigation strategies, Purview is more focused on that alerting and policy tuning strategy. There is no one right way or the other, but I should emphasize that security ops are the people who typically work within the Defender XDR space, whereas compliance typically works within the Purview tuning space. Make sure you understand before you get started and you start ingesting these things where your responsibility lies. Are you going to be working with other teams in the security space in XDR, combining things like Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Identity, or are you going to be working within the compliance space specifically, working within the e-discoveries realm? There is, again, no right or wrong way, but there is a clear bias as to which one of the tools is going to be most suited to particular scenarios. Now, regardless of where the alerts end up, because they can go to both, the DLP alert lifecycle itself has a clear step-by-step. When an alert is triggered and we detect a violation, effectively it means that a rule condition in some way, shape, or form has been met. The notification then happens and you can choose where that goes. DLP alert dashboard as the baseline and optionally across the Defender XDR. Triaging is then the important piece. Not only is it prioritization, it's reprioritization. So if something has been marked as low confidence and maybe we see an aggregate of events, that might still represent a high level incident. So it's about the triaging to make sure that things are being categorized correctly and there's not extra nuance or context that we're interested in here. Because we now have a key starting point, we can start to look in the surrounds, looking for extra context and events and files and user actions, things like that, that might give us additional enrichment to understand how things are being put together in the investigation phase. Now, the ultimate goal, and this can happen quite quickly, is to get to remediation as quickly as possible. Understand that what actions need to be taken and be able to actually take those actions. This can be anything from coaching a user through to actively blocking a user. This can be disabling access, or it can be simply moving a file to the right location. Each incident and each alert is going to have a slightly different scope required to make sure that things work well. But we still need to be able to feed those findings back into the system. If you recognize that an alert was triggered too early, you need to be able to adjust the policy sensitivity. So this needs to be an investigation finding, feeding back into the sensitivity to change how the alerts generate next time. If your feedback is that things have worked exactly as intended, that's good because it means we can reinforce the use of that alerting system and the policy next time. Now, because alerts can span across multiple different locations, and also because they are only typically retained for 30 days, you may want to have a longer retention period put in place simply so you can investigate things over a bigger period of time. If that's the case, simply go through and export them out to Defender XDR. That has a 6-month retention on its alerts by default, so it gives you a much longer period of investigation beyond just that initial 30-day to understand how policies are being affected. Now, when you create a policy itself, there's only a couple of things you need to change to make sure that it generates alerts in the right way. Literally, there's just an incident report section, and you just need to flick on the switches that you require. So, at a baseline, the top says what severity level we require for the admin reports. Essentially, how severe is this thing? Is it low, medium, or high? We also have the ability to aggregate, so you can choose how you want to aggregate these things. Note, we've got here, we require more than 15 to be able to push these through. Certain components within the settings there, we can say 25 plus are required to push out to XDR, but if it's within this scenario, we want to keep it in this local location. Essentially, we can tune this to meet the needs of the different teams as required, tuning alert thresholds to make sure it only goes to the place that it should when it needs to. You don't want to make sure that alerts are showing up for every single thing that you put in place. You want to make sure that the data you get is meaningful. The worst thing that we need to put in place with an alert is setting something up that creates fatigue. If someone sees an alert and ignores it because they've received 10 of the same alert earlier today, we haven't done our job. So make sure you're thinking about the severity you set, how alert messages are sent out, even down to who owns the incident itself, and make sure that the right people see it in the right way. If you need to go through and set suppression, you can do so and customize the different settings within that space. And once we've got this tuned out, or at the very least as we start tuning things, alerts will now start flowing in. What you're seeing here is a basic DLP alert. And on the right-hand side, we also have the Copilot investigation pane. Security Copilot can generate alert summaries to give you better context around the metadata to understand how an alert actually occurred. There's a number of different tabs within it, details being the first one showing things like user, action, etc. Events and user activity are contained within it, and of course, we need to know the match context. Why did this actually show up in the first place? So we go through, we view the match content, and then we can use this as a way to investigate and drill through. All right, now that our alerts are being generated, whether we're in our early stages of testing and need to tune, or we've got a tuned space, we are able to start investigating within Purview. Now, there's quite a number of things that we should be interested in. First of all, our Details tab here allows us to go through and view the user, the actions they took, the name of the incident, things like that. The events themselves allow us to be able to see further information about how things have actually triggered. And user activity gives us context but focused on behavioral workloads. So go take a look at that if you're interested in what the users actually did. Within our detail structure, we can also view information about what actually triggered this. And there's a number of filters you can put in place around certain users and being able to drill through and get further information as needed. Now, one of the big events that we need to focus on here as well is our side pane. If you are utilizing Security Copilot, it is able to go through and actually provide event summaries on the fly to give you an idea about where this has been triggered, some of the different alert correlation components, and related pieces of information that might be relevant to what we're looking at here. Where you have extremely complex environments or a large number of alerts coming through, this is a perfect way to be able to triage this information. Now, within Purview, because this is mostly focused on things that are related to the compliance side of the stack, we should go take a look at the security side now over in XDR. Things look very similar, but a little different in that we're focused on correlating alerts through to an incident directly. So as we investigate incidents in depth, you'll be able to see how different alerts are actually cross-correlating and aggregating to one another. If we have different endpoint, email, identity signals, all of these different things pulling together, we will bundle them into the one spot and correlate them into a single location. Because of the way that XDR is set up, you are also able to go through and use the advanced hunting state to query across using the Custo query language, or KQL. There's a lot of different logs that are available, and you can effectively access the raw data directly within Defender. Beyond this, we also now have the ability, because we've integrated with other systems within XDR, to do things like device isolation. So if we do note a breach on a device, we can actually lock that device down, or log users out directly, or prevent further actions against that file based on user behavior. Consider this correlation moment as a way to take the individual signals that we have within Purview and be able to roll them into broader action sets. Purview is not just isolated here. Taking the information that it generates and being able to feed those alerts into other systems means we can take more direct action based on what other capabilities we have, based on suspicious exfiltration, USB activity, those sorts of things. Okay, now there is one last point I do want to kind of touch on here, and it's how to actually follow up on an alert. It's the last piece of it, right? Once we follow up on it, we then want to feed it in as alert and get the insights out of it. So what do we do when something is done, when the investigation is closed? Well, in Purview, that's fairly straightforward. We just need to set an alert status across to either investigating or resolved as is done. Make sure you are assigning any comments so we know what needs to change, if anything, and feel free to use Copilot to go through and summarize that alert history. XDR does work a little bit differently because it's part of a broader security solution. So when an alert comes in, you first need to assign an owner, and then we can choose remediation actions that need to occur. Think of it more as security response followed by chained risks after the fact. There is going to be a big difference between the compliance state and the security state. So again, emphasizing it one last time, make sure you're using the right tool for the job for what you need to do. As a last point, alerts require pretty heavy documentation, especially where we want to use the insights we gain to be able to make improvements elsewhere in the environment. So make sure you write your notes down and essentially just give people stuff to work from after the fact. All right, in this video, we covered 3 main areas: how to implement data loss prevention more broadly within the endpoint protection stack, how we work with DLP protection in Edge for Business, and we also looked at different browsers and their extensions there, and then I gave you a bit of a summary on DLP alerts across both Purview and over in Defender XDR. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.